What's up, Michael F. Schein? Welcome to the Human to Human podcast, my friend. So glad that you were able to make it here today.
I am so pleased to be here. I can't wait.
So we were mutually introduced. That doesn't make sense. We were introduced by a mutual friend. That makes more sense. Michael Roderick. I feel like Michael knows everyone, no?
He absolutely knows everybody. Yeah.
And Michael,
he is the single most well-connected person I know.
I think there's many people who would say that about Michael.
Yeah.
But you know what? What's cool about him is he doesn't make it like a thing. Like he doesn't quote brag. He doesn't, talk about it. He's just that guy for everyone. And I think there's two types of people. There's people like Michael who have all of this and kind of are just very humble about it. And then there's people like Michael that are not humble about it. Let's just leave it at that.
I agree.
So Michael, man, I'm super excited to talk to you today, not just about your book, but about your business in general. And we're going to dive into all things about harnessing raw emotion, leveraging 12 strategies to draw massive attention, and so much more. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about who is Michael today and what is your story?
Yeah, as I'm sure is the case with many of your guests, because you pick interesting people, I have a long and winding story. The funny thing is, you mentioned my business. I never wanted to be in business in any way, shape, or form. My parents were always encouraging me to take business classes. I took like 3 to make them happy, and I did not. It felt like I was learning ancient Greek. That's how little I cared. And I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to do something kind of artsy fartsy. I wanted to write novels since I was a little kid, and then after that, I wanted to write songs. And I played in a band when I first came out of college, which did not make said parents very happy. And as most of these things do, it didn't end up becoming my career, because that's a very, very hard thing to make happen. However, I'm not really the world's greatest guitar player. I'm not really the world's greatest singer. And I'm not saying that to be humble. I'm truly not. I came out of the punk scene where, you heard about the Clash never being great singers and players, but that doesn't work out for most people. So, however, with all of that said, I got a lot farther with that than I should have. We got a residency at this club, Arlene's Grocery, which is a really, famous club that the Strokes got discovered at. We sold it out on a Wednesday night. We were on TV. We were on the cover of the New York Press. So, we had some success. And I think, other than the fact that I played with guys better than me, I think a lot of that success came from the fact that we were doing marketing without knowing that it was marketing. And it was a very certain kind of marketing. It's what I came to call hype, although I didn't think of it as that, because I and really the other guys in the band were really interested in art that was kind of merged with promotion. So, there are, back when we were into punk and into rock and that kind of thing, there were 2 types of acts. There were the ones who just got up on stage and strummed and played, and they wore their flannel shirts or whatever. And then there were bands like Bowie or Devo or these really over-the-top acts where the promotion was part of the art, and that was really cool. Or the Sex Pistols, where the manager, the Queen had a silver jubilee on the Thames River, so they got a boat to go down the Thames singing this song calling the Queen a fascist, because they knew it would attract attention. We were really interested in that kind of stuff. So we would do things like that. Like, we used to put posters all over town that said Dave Matthews must die, just because, we knew that would get people worked up.
Because why not, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had our reasons, I guess, but I used to dress as a nun for this song called Ash Wednesday, which got press. We actually got ourselves, when I said we were on TV, what I didn't tell you is the show we got on was Showtime at the Apollo, and we knew we would be booed off. It was just obvious that we were the token band that was being booed off, but we did that on purpose, right? So we would do these kind of things. And when that kind of went to the wayside, I needed money. I needed to figure out what I was going to do with my life. So I got a job. And at that point, one thing about me, I may not have been interested in business, but I was always a very hard worker. And I'm not a dummy. So once I started taking that seriously, I started to do well. I started to, work hard and come up with ideas and this and that. And one thing led to another. And it was a very brass tacks job. The way I ended up in there is a whole other story, which we don't have to go into, but very, very non-artsy. And I learned in the first 3 years were great because I became an adult, and I learned that there were some parts of business that I liked. But after I was there for 8 years, I was scared to give up my paycheck. And I was pretty miserable by the end, right? And so I eventually did leave, and I was going to become a marketing, what I thought was a copywriter, but was really a content or demand generation writer. And I figured because I wrote well, it would be easy. I would just, go out and show people my stuff and people would hire me. And I have like a year's worth of savings. And then I almost burned through it all. It was really scary. I had no idea how to get business. And I read every marketing and sales book. It did nothing for me for the most part. And right when it was about to all fold, I started to think to myself out of desperation, like, how come I was so good at getting attention with the band and all of that? And it was because I thought of it more as hype or art or benevolent mischief than I did as sales and marketing. So I started to say to myself, what if I start acting like that, but in a different context? And I did that. And it worked well. And I started to get business, and my writing practice started to do well. And then people wanted the marketing more than the, writing. And that's how it all started. And that's why I'm so interested in this thing that I call hype. I try to stay away from the word marketing.
Dude, this is such a fascinating topic. And I don't think anyone has brought that twist to any of the previous. I think this will be, I'm not sure how many episodes, but maybe around episode 35, 36, 37. I just started this year, and never have I heard it in this context, which is something I'm really excited by.
I'm glad to hear that. It's good to be original.
So did you have, actually, maybe a better way to ask is, how did you get your first 3 clients?
My first 3 clients. Wow. I guess it depends if we're talking about writing clients or marketing clients. I mean, the first 3, it wasn't like I was getting no work. I mean, in the beginning, I did what everybody does. They were just so few and far between that I couldn't pay my bills. But
were these clients of Microfame Media?
Well, no, in the beginning, I just called it Michael Schein Communications. I was just a freelance copywriter. So again, I never wanted to own a business. It's just what I realized about writing or copywriting or content writing is people don't really want the writing. They want what the writing can get them, which is usually clients, right? So when I used the marketing to get writing clients, and then that started to do well. So it went from like one every X number of months to like a regular stream. I was writing like, the bad part about that is I was working like a dog, because if you're not writing, you're not earning, And so eventually, not only were people saying that they were curious about my methods, I also realized it was a better way to make a living, to have a business, gasp. So I got interested in business, and now I'm very interested in business. But my first 3 clients, if I'm honest, it was just the typical thing. I mean, one was I got my alumni magazine randomly, and I saw a thing in the back, someone advertising for, an alum trying to get work. And I wrote him and asked for advice. And I guess he saw himself in me, and gave me some work. The second one was at a networking event. I mean, the third, it's not even worth mentioning, but they were so few and far between, and I charged so little. One was from my sister, the company she worked at. So it was enough to keep me going and not quit totally, but I couldn't support myself.
So now, I mean, you've had this business for almost a decade, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So almost a decade. So what do you think has kept you going?
Well, I mean, one thing that's kept me going is just that it's been thankfully successful. I mean, I have a good roster of clients. People like what we do. We've done some really good campaigns for some prominent companies. So, I mean, we worked for the Medici. One really exciting client, one of the first clients that I got sort of in my new way that was a marketing client was this company called the Medici Group. So there was a guy that I was already an admirer of named Franz Johansson, and he wrote 2 books, one which is really popular called The Medici Effect, and the other, which in some ways I like better, called The Click Moment. And they were influences on me. I recommend them. But The Medici Effect was so successful that he started this big consulting company. And the problem was that he got so much consulting work that after The Click Moment, he didn't have time to come up with a new idea. I mean, for clients, yes, but a new version of the Medici Effect. And he was saying he didn't even have time to write an article. So he needed a systematic approach to generating content and doing it in a way that brought clients in. And we were able to do that for him. And I had already been an admirer of his work, so that was really fun. And projects like that were very cool, and still are. I guess the other thing, and the reason that I wrote the book that I wrote, so I kind of codified these ideas, my weird trial by error approach to marketing, which I call hype, that then I went back and looked at all of the unconventional marketers. So yeah, rock band managers and hip hop managers, but I also looked at propaganda artists and cult leaders. And I said to myself, a lot of people think that the kind of, this idea of, we think, you'll tell people, what is marketing? They don't even know. But what I call hype, I don't know what marketing is, but hype to me, it's usually thought of as a negative thing. But what I think of it as just getting a large number of people emotional enough and then steering them in whatever direction you want to go. And I realized that a lot of these bands and artists that I like, Andy Warhol, whatever, they all did that. But so do cult leaders and propagandists. So did Martin Luther King. So I said to myself, is there a method to this madness? Is it just that a lot of bad people are good at this and a few good people and it's not worth doing? Or are there some mass psychology principles at play, and can it be applied ethically? And so I started to really study it, and I got really obsessed with the research. And it turned out there really are principles, there really are strategies. And yeah, so the reason I cared so much about writing this book is that I often see that the bad guys, quote unquote, come to this stuff naturally because they have no compunction about using it. Whereas I run into all these great businesses, great artists, great writers, great companies, great consultants. And you always hear some version of like, I don't really feel so comfortable about, rocking the boat, about being contrarian. It's not the way the world should be. And I really wanted to make the case that this stuff is neutral. It's not moral or immoral, and it can be applied to either. And that if you're doing good work in the world, we need you to learn effective group psychology in the service of getting your ideas out there and getting people to buy them or sign up to them, because the bad guys already get it. I mean, they have no, it's people like you, the good guys, who need to know more about it. So I just became really obsessed with getting these ideas to kind of a larger canvas.
I love this. And I think there's so many people are going to be able to relate to this. The typical listener to this is the entrepreneur, the business owner, the solopreneur, the creative, someone who's looking at making an impact. And I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of, broadly just saying the word marketing. Like, what is marketing and how does it work? And Facebook ads this and emails that. And it just seems like it's very tactics, right? It's very tactic focus. And what you're saying is like, you're identifying what's already worked in the past and now framing it with more context, more meat, and probably much more applicability in 2021. Because I know your book's not out yet, correct? It's up there. I would love to dive into the book if you're open to it. I'd love to learn about these 12 strategies.
Yeah, let's do that. And before we do, though, I want to comment on something you said, because you really hit the nail on the head with something. I used to take all these courses and read all these books and about tactics, like you said, right? Which are important. I mean, I remember one was on Google Plus. It was Google Plus was going to change the world, and it was this big marketing thing.
I remember that from my university days, thinking, "Oh my God, Google Plus is going to change the game."
Yeah, because it's tied to Google, and Google has all the power, blah blah blah, and it did for like 6 months, right? If you could master Google Plus for 6 months, you would get all the traffic in the world. And then it was Snapchat, and then it was Vine, and you know, even the stuff with the funnels and all of that, that stuff can be very valuable. However, they are tools. Just like, you know, you used to, if you see an old hammer, it's like this like brick on like a stick, right? Now they have very sleek hammers, or old saws versus new saws. It's good to learn the power saws versus the old saws. However, it doesn't make you an architect, and to know how to use hammers and saws. And the fact is, these principles are ancient. They're encoded. It's because our brains don't perceive reality accurately. So, for example, Augustus, who was the first emperor of Rome, who we still think of as a great man, August. I mean, that's where that word comes from. He was a dictator. He overthrew a republic and became a dictator. And Romans hated nothing more than kings. That was like an insult, a curse word in Rome. So he needed to legitimize his rule because he got it by brute force. So he commissioned a poem, an epic poem that made him the latest in the line. You know, it basically justified this idea of imperial rule. It was storytelling, and it was the Aeneid, and we still read it to this day. But like, that didn't depend on Google Plus or whatever the newest thing is, Parlor, I guess, whatever. So I think it's important to know those deep concepts because they never go away. And if you're armed with those, you can do anything, really. You can find the tools.
I've got a question before we dive into the 12 based on this. So you've obviously not only have you had your own business for, 8, 9, almost 10 years.
Yeah.
But we're talking about these principles now that are probably timeless. Would you say? I would say they're all.
I would say they're timeless. Yeah.
They're timeless. So what are the common mistakes that you see that entrepreneurs make today when it comes to, again, the word marketing, or it feels like we should have figured it out by now, right? Like, but everyone's always searching for the next thing, the next tactic, the next thing. Like what is the mistake that you see?
I think there's a couple of things. It's a great question. I think one of the things is exactly what you said, focusing on the tools instead of the fundamental principles. However, I think there's something else, and it's something that I fall prey to even now. So if I could perfectly apply these 12 strategies, I could rule the world because they just work. And it's not that I say so. I've just interviewed the best of the best. I've studied it. I've read every biography. So why don't I rule the world? I'm successful, whatever, but why don't I rule the world? Because my emotions get in the way. The reason that bad guys do better at this is because they're sociopaths. They've done experiments with antisocial personality disorder, which is a kind of a basket term for psychopathy, sociopathy, extreme narcissism. And when these people get in highly emotional situations, their heartbeat doesn't go up the way normal people do. So they look at human beings as chess pieces. So that's horrible. At the same time, that doesn't mean everything they do is horrible. It's just that they see the world very clearly. Now, the trick is to constantly work on getting as close to that as possible without becoming a horrible person and losing your empathy. So how do you do that? You have to self-regulate. I mean, all of this stuff about meditation and exercise, and I just recently got involved in a martial art, ironically, called Wing Chun, which is funny since we're in a pandemic. But you got to know that, I mean, you might know that there's a principle called milk before meat, where you have to introduce really new things in small stages according to a plan. And you might know that. And then you get in an excited conversation. Oh, let me tell you about this great idea. And you just can't help yourself. And I think the third thing is just people don't know. They just don't have an organizing frame. They just go around doing stuff.
Yeah, it's easier to sometimes let life control you versus the other way around.
I think that's part of it. And I also just think, not everyone has time to read 150 biographies or more. I mean, I don't know, in other words, this was my area of interest, but remember what I did when I first started my business. I kind of fell into this by accident out of desperation. I did what everyone did. I took a sales coaching class with money I didn't have. I read the Google Plus book. I read all of these books. I took advice. I mean, it worked a little, but I don't know. You need the right information.
Yeah. And something that I've consciously made or have been making an effort of doing is reading more from the past.
Yeah.
Versus reading the next greatest tactic, or it's, you know, everyone's, what worked then still works now. Maybe it's just has some dust on it, or at least perceived dust of you thinking, hey, well, that worked in the 40s or the 30s or the 1800s. But no, the same principles I think really apply today.
And I should also say another one is people don't experiment. So there's all this stuff about A/B testing. Some people go too far with that because they're so analytical. However, the people who aren't analytical, they just read a book, even my book, you know, and they just follow the rules verbatim. But every situation is different. The idea that you can just apply anything and just have it work. No, I mean, you do little bets, you do little tests, you see how it works in your own situation, and then you adjust.
So, Michael, are you down if I put you on the spot and we talk about these 12 strategies?
Of course.
Let's start with number 1. And I've already got an idea of a possible book club with your book, if you're interested, which we can talk about.
Oh, of course. That'd be wonderful.
I think that'd be super powerful. So, really I'm going to hand it over to you and just start with.
It's like a course. Yeah.
Start with step 1.
All right. Well, hype strategy number 1 is called make war, not love.
Before we go into these 12, I'm going to ask everyone who's listening to this, just kind of like reset your brain right now. Forget about everything that you know. Leave any preconceived notions at the door and come into this next part of the podcast with just a blank slate, and ideally a notebook if you have one, and just hear this, extract where you think this could apply to your life, to your business, because that's the lens that I'm going to be looking at this through. And I know that the easiest thing to say is, well, that won't work for me, or I already know that. Those are some of the most dangerous words, I think, in our language today. Is, oh, I already know that. So with that context, Michael, over to you.
Well, thank you. And just remember, you know, keep me honest, because this is a 200 or whatever page book. So I could probably spend the rest of the time talking about the first strategy. So anyway, hype strategy number 1, I call make war, not love. So what that basically means is that the best way to organize a tribe around yourself, which is really important if you want followers, is to have an enemy. So it's kind of like Independence Day. The only thing that could organize the earth was the aliens attacking. And people think that means that you have to pick fights with people, and that actually does work. However, it doesn't mean being a troll. Just insulting people's looks and their ethnicity and their whatever is just being a troll. What it means is picking fights with ideas, whether that's with a person, but even just an idea. So, you know, Basecamp, for example, if you're familiar with them, they in their field, what is it? The most project management software was very complex, and people prided themselves on that. You wanted as many features as possible, and they picked a fight with the idea of complexity in all its forms, right? So that's a very, very powerful one.
And the founder, Jason, Rework is one of those books where you could just open up any page, and I think all of his chapters are like 1 to 2 pages.
Yeah. That first of all, it's a great book. Second of all, that's such a good point, because everything that guy does, he's so savvy. You think he just cares about these things. It all ties back to his product. Don't work 6 days, don't work 90 hours a week. Yeah, he believes that. At the same time, he gives you a software that's streamlined so that you don't have to work like a dog figuring things out. I mean, it's his book is designed to be easy to get through. It's very savvy.
Okay, number 2.
Yeah, so number 2 is I actually just pulled it up so I don't get it in the wrong order. So it's create your own secret society, which I call the piggybacking principle. So what that means is that the great hype artists, and I use that term.
I love it.
Right there. If you like hip hop, you can call it the best hype man. They make it seem like their following and all the attention they're getting is grassroots, that it's just happening organically, that by person they got discovered. And some of that might be true, but almost without fail, what these people do well is they have really deep ties with people under the surface that they can call on to pull strings for them and make things happen quickly and in a big way. I mean, you see that with when Tucker Max decided he wanted to start a business that wasn't about drinking and sleeping with lots of women. He wanted to create Book in a Box, which I think has a different name now.
Scribe, I believe, yeah.
Right. So what did he do? I mean, he did $1 million in sales in 2 months or something. How did he do that? Did he advertise? No, he called his friends, Ryan Holiday, James Altucher, Tim Ferriss. I mean, he's friends with all these guys. They have a little secret society, and he said, put me on your show and talk me up. Simple. Because how else could have he done? I mean, the people who like Book in a Box hate his old stuff. I hope they serve beer in hell. Right. So I could talk. I'm like resisting the temptation to go on for 7 hours about all of this stuff.
Yes, 3.
Yeah. Perfect your packaging. So there's a quote from these guys, Elliot Aronson and Anthony Protgonis, who are the foremost experts in propaganda, studying propaganda. And I might get this quote wrong, but it's the essence of propaganda, of good propaganda, is a well-designed package. So does that just mean having a cool logo and wrapping your stuff well? No, it means sort of what we were talking about with Jason Fried. You know, it's this idea that everything about you and what you put out into the world is well thought out. So if I'm appearing in public, I can wear a blazer and tie because that's quote unquote professional, or a hoodie and sneakers, but that's what everyone does. What is that thing about you, right? So Andy Warhol basically had this image with the silver wig and the tight clothing and the laconic attitude, and he had his factory was draped in silver, and he spoke a certain way in public. He even used to say, sometimes it's a relief to go home and take off my Andy suit. But a lot of times we're very haphazard about that stuff.
I love that one. So cool.
Yeah. Hype strategy 4, give the little babies their milk. So the idea is that you can't give babies meat when they're first born because they'll get sick and die. You've got to give them milk first. So you'll often see people, I alluded to this before, they'll have this totally new idea, this really scary thing, because all new ideas are scary, just like all new religions are scary. And they'll just start, because they're so convinced their idea is good, bombarding people with it, and they wonder why they turn people away. Our brains, literally are afraid of big change. It turns us off. It's, if something turns from green to orange really slowly, that's fall. That's no big deal. But if it turns from green to orange in 1 minute or 1 second, that's a forest fire. So you really need to introduce new concepts in stages. And before people know it, they're bought in. And that's if ideas are new. It's different. When ideas are common, you want to be as flamboyant as possible. It's counterintuitive. So hype strategy 6 is become a magus. I say that's the root word for magician, but I didn't use magician because there was actually a tribe, an ethnic group in ancient Persia, which was ruled by the Medes, called the Magi, like the Christmas story. That's who they were. And they positioned themselves as these kind of consultants. They wore robes and amulets, and they would do predictions and forecast, and they would cast, bones and tea leaves and fire or whatever they used. I don't know. I don't remember. But they had all this whole process. And sometimes they would predict it wrong, but they just maintained their power, even when the Medes got overthrown by the Persians. And it's kind of funny, isn't it? 2 years in a row, or two seasons in a row, 2 campaigns in a row, Nate Silver and the rest of the prognosticators have gotten it totally wrong. But we're going to believe them next time because they use charts and figures and standard deviations and blah, 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 blah. So you need to present yourself as a larger than life figure who knows all the answers. Total certainty, use all of the stuff that magicians use, but the modern ones. I mean, isn't it funny that consultants, big consulting agencies, they bring 21-year-olds to tell 55-year-olds how to do their job because they've got the right charts and figures, right? So, hype, and there's more to that. it's turn yourself into a larger than life figure, you know, in various ways. Hype strategy number 7, find a void and fill it. So I have to tell the story that I used in the book, because this is really interesting. There was a thing in the 19th century, especially in the United States, that was really, really popular in the late 19th century and early 20th century, called spiritualism. And we've all seen it in the movies. People believed that they could communicate with the dead if they did seances. And it wasn't considered, you know, it made sense to people because telegraphs and things like that were new. And it seemed like, well, why can't you communicate with the spiritual realm, right? And this whole thing was started by these sisters called the Fox sisters, who could communicate with the dead, and they heard this knocking noise. And it turned out that over years, they basically admitted that they were cracking their joints against floorboards, right? But it still didn't go out of fashion. Why was that so popular? Well, it was right after the Civil War. And that was, people don't realize how bloody that war was. That was apocalyptic. I mean, we lost more young men than in any war in American history. And so there were all these women who encountered loss. I mean, who everybody had lost a son or a brother, and it was really tough. And there was this massive void. And so people really, when there's a void of any kind, they're looking for someone to fill it. So that's pretty important. It doesn't have to be death, but just some sort of void.
That's so crazy. That's so fascinating to hear. I remember the first time I ever heard the word seance, and maybe this is top of mind because I watched something about it this weekend, but it was actually in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Really? There was yeah, aren't they rebooting that to make it a dramatic show?
There was some reunion talks, but there was an episode where
really the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, really?
Yeah, Hillary, who was the daughter, one of the daughters, her husband proposed to her while he was bungee jumping and died.
I remember that.
Remember that? And
that was weird, actually.
It was super weird. But then a couple episodes later, obviously Hillary was still mourning. So they went to like some, woo-woo type of woman to perform a seance. And Trevor, who is now dead, was speaking to her through the seance. The lights were all flickering. And it was just the first time I'd ever even saw that concept of a seance.
So first of all, your depth of knowledge of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, that that her fiance was named Trevor.
Every episode, man.
Yeah, I liked it too. I as a side note, I was just watching the reboot of Saved by the Bell, which I think was a terrible show, the original, and I've seen every single episode of that show. I don't know why.
Yeah, I totally hear you, man.
So, well, it was a very, very big thing. I mean, it shows you how big it was, in all seriousness, that 100 whatever years later, it's trickled down into the pop culture. But it was really, really a big phenomenon. Make it scientific is hype strategy 8. That's when I say become a magus, I kind of conflated the two. That's more about use your weaknesses and spin them into strengths, and really dial up the positives about you and kind of minimize the negatives. And you can do that through some of the tactics I mentioned before. Make it scientific is really about how none of us are experts in anything except what we're experts in, except our field. And yet we rely on experts. So the example I use there is, so Simon Sinek has this whole start with why thing. And you would think from the way he talks that he's some sort of social scientist. I mean, he wears his little spectacles and he's always talking about dopamine and norepinephrine. And, he did that video about how millennials are terrible. And, the brain reacts to the parenting style of the this and that. And everyone was like, oh, absolutely, absolutely. The guy only worked at advertising agencies before he started his own thing. He is like a professional salesman. And he has no scientific knowledge or background other than what he's read in books.
Right.
So he could easily come out there and say, oh, millennial parents should really treat their kids, with more boundaries. And people would be like, who the heck are you? Because what he's saying, if you look at the statistics, doesn't make any sense at all. Every millennial was treated that way. I mean, I don't know, or start with why. Okay, that book gave people a lot of inspiration, but it's not really saying anything very unique. He's basically saying, have a reason for doing what you do and love what you do. but he talks with all of this scientific packaging, and people just immediately trust it. And that's a very useful tactic. I mean, you see, if you look at your favorite thought leaders of the day, they wrap their stuff in all of this kind of lingo. And sometimes you can create your own lingo. There are people who they create ranking and rating systems that everyone just believes in, or they so that's a useful strategy.
What's number 9 now?
Number 9 is prayers, spells, and symbols. And this you got to read the chapter to really understand, because all I'm basically saying here is that our brains are attracted to certain points, certain types of linguistic and visual structures. So it's funny, human beings, it's really hard to learn how to talk. I mean, we all speak, but think about that. There's just this blur of random sounds. And by the age of 1, you basically can sort that through. So it's a tough thing. And it's a big competitive advantage for human beings. So we have evolved to make it easier. So that's where things like alliteration and rhyme and repetition come from. Even as adults, we're attracted to it because it makes sense. It helps us learn language. So what is rhyme? I mean, why do we like this weird thing where the sounds match? Well, it makes it easy for babies. We're basically running statistics in our brain. You're hearing how often do the same sounds repeat and tie to other things. And these kinds of things are useful. So there's a funny story not a funny story. I wasn't allowed to include this in the book, but it's really interesting. There was this German guy who went to Harvard in maybe the 19 teens. And he really got into the life there. And he even played piano for the football team. And he had never seen football before. And he would hear the Harvard students, I forget, his name was like Ernst something, I forget. And they would shout, "Fight, Harvard, fight, Harvard, fight, Harvard, fight." And everyone would get worked up into a frenzy. So years went by, he went home, met a young man named Adolf Hitler, was one of the first people who attended his talks, bought into the whole National Socialist movement. And he was an early guy. And Hitler was saying, we need something to rally the people. And he said, when I was at Harvard football games, you should have seen it. The whole crowd would raise their fist and go, "Fight, Harvard, fight." And they would get worked up into a frenzy. So he came up with Sig Heil, Sig Heil. That's a perfect example. Repetition.
That's insane.
Yeah,
wow.
That's actually how it happened. Yeah. So
wow.
It's really interesting. And, they're just having repetition, repeating something over and over, the right kinds of phrases, sounds, stripped down images, it's really, really useful. Think of the Wu-Tang Clan. They would just put that W all over Staten Island. No one even knew what it was. Mm-hmm. And it just made them stars, and that they could rap well. But yeah.
I'm already hoping that if you're still listening to this and like, how have you not bought the book yet? So head on over. Obviously we're going to link it, but we're going to link it in the show notes, but I'm already thinking of a bunch of people who need to hear this message.
That's awesome.
What is number 10?
So kind. And number 10 is embrace theater and drama. So, and by the way, you got the bonus on the Nazi story because that was in the first draft. They made me get rid of all the Nazi stories.
That's fair.
So embrace theater and drama. So the obvious part of that is how it works on a big scale. So if you look at an Amway rally, a Tony Robbins thing, a rock concert, whatever, people transcend, they get swept away by lights and bombardment of the senses, certain kinds of storytelling. But I think what's really relevant for people reading the book, and just maybe for your listeners, is very few of us can do that. There are ways to enact theatrical staging on a smaller scale. So for example, I spoke with a guy earlier today, a podcaster, who is also a social influence expert. And in back of him, he had very perfectly arranged the books, like all of these, Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. And then he had this chart that was really sophisticated looking. And that wasn't by accident. And I mean, real estate people do that. I mean, if you look at rational economics, should you really need to stage a house? Everyone knows it's not going to look like that when they live there. Mm-hmm. So why do they light candles and do all that stuff? Put out place settings.
Make the fresh cookies.
all of that. That's a great example. Yeah.
Yeah.
The smell, all of your senses. Yeah, number 11, we're getting close, guys. Number 11 is set down a rock for your followers to cling to. So what that basically means, I actually quoted Jesus in the heading, Peter, I will build my rock on you, or whatever he says. Yeah. Because, I'm not a religious guy, and I used to wonder how people were so into religion, and not in a derogatory way at all. I just used to wonder because I kind of lack that gene. And I realized that part of the reason is I've gone through hard things in my life, but compared to a lot of people, my life has been pretty good. I live in the United States of America with all its faults. I've always had enough food to eat, whatever. But if you're really losing a lot and life is really hard, knowing that God will always love you, that is just a rock. It's like that will never go away. I mean, even your children can die, your wife can leave you. I mean, I know this sounds bleak, but these things that seem so solid, and that's the human condition. And so if you can provide, so a few ways to do this, I call it write a Bible and form a church. And so a lot of people write business books, and that's great. And that's useful, but some business books are just business books, leadership strategies for the 21st century, whatever. Okay. But that's different than writing a Bible, something that has all the answers to the world. The way people talk about Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, or How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's like, this is how to win friends and influence people, or the 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. The other thing is build a church, having this sort of institution that, there's a great story that I talk about, and the name is escaping me right now, of his, I think it's IMG. It's the premier agency for golfers. It was Arnold Palmer's agency. The guy who started that agency created a ranking system for golf that basically, if you are ranked by this system, you're a good golfer. And people just believe this system. This is kind of back to the make it scientific. But what's funny is there was one golfer who wasn't signed up to his agency who was like ranked number 60, even though he had more wins than the other people. But as a result, this guy has this like church. It's like, this is like the 10 commandments of golf, and it makes him very powerful. So that's another one. And then the last one is hype strategy number 12, fetishize work, master effortless doing. So this is interesting. So have you ever noticed that Gary Vaynerchuk and a lot of other gurus are really obsessed with telling you that you need to work like a dog?
Mm-hmm.
Why do they do that? I mean, really, if you really think about it, why do you do that? Because what young person do you know who's interested in entrepreneurship, who listens to these kind of podcasts, who wakes up at 11, goes, stops work at 3, smokes pot all day, doesn't really work? I mean, those people are lost causes, and there aren't that many. Most people are working hard. There's a lot more that goes into success besides hard work, right? And if anything, people should be working less hard, because this country is obsessed with hours for the sake of hours. So why does he do it? Because most of his fans aren't rich. I mean, most of them, there's people buying his stuff. He does it because when you get people to work hard on your behalf, they bond to you. Because if you work really hard for a guru because of what they tell you, and then you realize that their ideas aren't as good as you thought they were, that's cognitive dissonance. It's very difficult to admit that to yourself. So you bond closer. So there used to be cults where you would walk in and see millionaires digging pits to nowhere. This guy Gurdjieff, who used to have people, or the Moonies, they sell stuff and raise money for the church, but like 65 hours of work a week. So what I always say is, if you want to learn how to be magnetic in this way, don't do what these people tell you to do. Watch what they do. But at the same time, and this goes back to the thing we talked about the biggest obstacle, master effortless doing. You need to work on attaining a state where you're not stressing out and flipping out and reacting all the time, because none of these principles will work for you if you can't master your own emotions. And I use examples from a very unpopular community for good reason, but the pickup artist community, which was definitely lost favor. However, for good reason, However, there was a quote in that book, The Game, which is about pickup artists, where the guy Mystery says to his minions before they're good at meeting women, he says, you're going to feel shy. You're going to feel embarrassed. You're not going to want to walk up to someone. Think of those emotions as a pebble in your shoe. Ignore them, because the emotions are what get in the way. And that's true.
Damn, man, this is the hype handbook right here.
That's my Bible, man. And I follow my own advice.
Dude, this has been incredible. And yeah, if you're interested, if you've took anything away from today's conversation, and Michael, is this your first book?
This is my first book of this sort. I wrote a really strange book at 18 that was published, that was a humorous teenage driver's manual called Teenage Roadhogs. Please don't look it up. I'm embarrassed by it. It's out of print, the whole deal. But I did do that. Yeah.
Well, guys, go support Michael on this one for sure.
Thank you.
I've got 3 final questions. What are you most excited about in the next 60 days outside of your book launch?
Oh gosh, yeah, that's the thing. I guess I'm excited about what the future may bring. I'm going to cheat a little because the book has made me think a lot about other things. And while I'll always do the client business because I find that really fulfilling and you know, it's the core of what we do, I really love the idea of reaching a lot of people with these ideas. So I've been planning and thinking about different ideas like workshops and things like that. So I'm excited about what that might turn out to be.
Awesome, man. I feel like there's a mountain there that you have yet to discover that's going to be beautiful.
Thank you. That's encouraging, actually. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Question number 2, outside of your own book that I think I'm going to buy, what are some go-to books that you think everyone should read? Whether they're books that you've gifted, books that you revisit once every couple of years, what are those for you?
How many more hours do we have?
We've got nine minutes.
Yeah, well, so I was, as I mentioned in the beginning, a writer before I was a business person, and I still identify that way. I wanted to be a writer since I was little, like since I was in first grade. And as a result, I mean, writers are readers, you know, like everyone, there's this new fad to read a lot, which is awesome. And I think that's great. But I used to be embarrassed about reading. I would carry like books around with like the cover facing in and like pretend that, you know, it was for a school assignment or whatever.
Now it's like a popularity contest.
It's popular. I know. So there are books that I recommend that have nothing to do with any of this stuff. I mean, there's a novel called The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Schein, which is my favorite novel. Actually, a book I used to recommend a lot was The Queen's Gambit, it was not a popular book, and now it's that popular
amazing
series. Yeah, the book's even better. You should read it. It's very good. But yeah, in terms of this material, I actually send out book recommendations about these kind of books. I mean, one that a lot of people have read, but it certainly set me down this path is Trust Me, I'm Lying by Ryan Holiday. That's pretty fantastic. There are old books. There's a book called The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon. It's from 1898, and it's the first book about crowd psychology, and it's still very readable. And you'll read this. Actually, I was reading this book around the time of the first Trump debate, the first primary debate, and it's a very thin book, and I said to myself, this guy's going to win, because this guy was describing how people react emotionally and irrationally. That's a great book. Yeah, there are plenty. I mean, I could keep going, but.
I love it. And my last question, Michael, this is one of my favorite questions. Tomorrow morning, everyone wakes up. Every city, every country, every continent, everyone wakes up tomorrow morning. They open up their bedroom curtains, and for whatever reason, everywhere in the world, they're all looking at the exact same billboard. Except tomorrow, Michael controls the message. What would you write on that billboard for the entire world to see?
Buy my book. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, the thing that came to mind was obey. Remember that movie, They Live, where all the billboards say obey? No, I think maybe I would say find side doors or explore side doors. I've always found that, for so long, for example, I was working that corporate job, and every single morning, I would get up at 5 a.m. and write. And people would tell me I was disciplined. And I was so miserable at that job that I would say, I'm not disciplined. It's the only happy moment in my day. And I used to feel so sad because I would say to myself, gosh, the only way I'm ever going to get out of this is to write some kind of short story that gets discovered, or a novel, or blah, blah, blah. So I went out and I did this whole business thing, and it's been 9-10 years. And now I've got a book coming out that to me isn't just a business book. Like, I really wrote this book as a book. You know what I mean? It's not just my business card. Like, I told stories, I got into it. So I'm a writer, like a real live writer with a book coming out. And that came through not just doing the typical thing, sending in short stories, hoping to get discovered. I found a side door into it. And I think that's so important. I think it's so important to really open your mind to how things are supposed to, get rid of this idea of how things are supposed to go, and kind of look for these side passages.
Super cool, man. Michael, where, if someone wants to follow up with you, send you a note, send you a letter, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give you my email. It's MFS, so like Michael Farley Schein, at microfamemedia.com. So fame, like MICROFAME, media.com, because people always say frame. I don't know why. I don't know why people go to that. But yeah, MFS at microfamemedia.com. The other thing is I send out these book recommendations if you do want them. It's hypereads.com/list, and they're not the everyday recommendations. So that's awesome. Another place, because I communicate with people in the book club quite a bit.
Well, dude, Michael, this has been an incredibly fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Karan. Me too.
It's made me think a lot about the impact that I want to have in my quote tribe, and how I should double down on certain things. And my last bonus question that I just thought about is, out of those 12 strategies, these 12 rules, what is the one that you think could change someone's life forever?
I don't know, because I think every person is different. I can tell you the one that's been the most useful to me. I mean, other than the Make War Not Love, because I wrote kind of a scathing article that launched my career, but on a regular basis, I think it's the create your own secret society. Really working below the surface to bond with people and connect with them using some interesting ways that I hadn't thought about before has been pretty game changing for my own career.
Amazing. Well, my friend, thank you so much for being here. And I know this is just the beginning.
Thank you. You give very good interview, my friend. You're very, yeah, I really enjoyed this.
Appreciate it.